Ashes of Valor. A War of Love. Chapter 4. Embers of the Future. Episode 1. In the Wake of Fire. The war had ended. But peace, true peace, did not arrive on golden chariots or thunderous parades. It came in fragments, in the slow rebuilding of walls, the cautious reopening of markets, and the first laugh of a child who no longer ducked at loud sounds. Velmora, for all its wounds, was breathing again. The capital, once ruled by councils and generals, now pulsed with new life. Streets once patrolled by armored boots now bustled with scholars, artisans, and farmers. Buildings once cloaked in banners of flame or steel now bore vines and paper lanterns. Yet beneath the surface of renewal, the wake of fire still lingered. It echoed in scarred stone, in the names chiseled into the memorial of the fallen, in the silence between songs, and in the hearts of those who had carried swords long after they forgot why. Aurelia Trent stood at the balcony of her modest stone cottage in the reclaimed Emberfall Highlands. Her command gear was sealed away, her mask turned into a museum relic. But the memory of war never left her body. Her joints still stiffened in cold. Her dreams still echoed with distant artillery. She tended a garden now, not out of love for flowers, but because living things demanded patience, something war had tried to steal from her. Cale Rourke visited often. He wore no medals now, only a cloak and a walking stick, his movements slowed by the damage sustained during the final battle. But his voice had returned its rhythm. He wrote history now, carefully, reluctantly. He refused to write his own chapter. "Let the future write us," he told Aurelia one night. "We were never meant to be heroes. Just warnings." One morning, a knock came at Aurelia's door. It was a courier, young, bright-eyed, carrying a sealed scroll embossed with the phoenix mark of the Unified Council. She opened it in silence. A single line. "The first flame ceremony is ready. The people ask for your presence." It had been a year since the final march. And now, Velmora would gather to light the first flame. Not a torch of war, but a beacon of unity. A fire lit not in rage, but in remembrance. Aurelia stood before the mirror in her hallway, holding her old cloak. For a long time, she did not move. Then she folded it neatly and left it on the chair. She would go, not as a general, but as a witness. At the heart of the city, where once the Senate bled, the first flame ceremony began. Thousands stood in quiet reverence. Children held flowers. Elders held hands. Survivors carried portraits. Aurelia arrived with Cale at her side. No guards. No fanfare. Just two weary souls walking through the city they had almost lost. A boy offered him the torch. Cale took it. Aurelia guided his hand. Together, they touched the flame to the new pyre. And the fire rose. Not in destruction, but in hope. Around them, voices began to sing, not a national anthem, not a military march, but a new song. A song of fields, of rebuilding, of mornings that no longer began with sirens. And as the flame danced in the wind, Aurelia whispered to Cale, "In the wake of fire, we chose to plant." He smiled. And for the first time, believed it. Episode 2. The Rise of the Echo Generals. In the quiet that followed the first flame ceremony, Velmora faced a question more complicated than war. Who would lead now that the legends had stepped down? With Aurelia and Cale out of command, the nation turned to a new generation, soldiers who had risen not through conquest, but through conviction. They were called not generals, not commanders, but echoes, symbols of the past reborn with a promise to never repeat it. And the first among them was General Lysa Veer. Lysa had marched beside Aurelia since the earliest days of the Flamebound. She had seen both the fall of the council and the rise of Tavian Rourke. Her name was spoken in classrooms now, her decisions dissected by scholars and war colleges alike. But Lysa did not seek fame. She sought prevention. Her first act as an Echo General was to dismantle Velmora's remaining autonomous drone battalions, technology once central to Kale's surveillance regime. "Let humans see humans again," she declared. "Let no more war be waged by machines." Following Lysa were two others. Commander Thalon Meyer, a quiet tactician from the coast who had served under Kale during the Frost campaigns. He now led the Reconciliation Corps, helping former combatants reintegrate into civilian life. And Major Senar Ilvara, a medical officer turned civic leader, who transformed old supply bunkers into mobile hospitals and peace stations. Her work in the southern provinces turned her into a symbol of healing, a white flame, in the nation's narrative. Together, these three became known as the Echo Triad. Not because they agreed, but because they balanced. Aurelia observed them from a distance, often invited to offer counsel but rarely accepting. She believed they had to learn not by imitation, but by imperfection. They must fail on their own, she told Kale one evening. Or they'll never learn how not to. Kale, ever the reluctant philosopher, chuckled. "I remember when we thought failure meant the end of the world." Aurelia looked at him, eyes heavy with memory. And for a while, it did. The Echo Generals restructured Velmora's command framework into a circle, no longer a pyramid. All units now had rotating leadership and civilian oversight. It was a slow shift. Many resisted. But change had begun. And though the word, general, still carried echoes of Kale and Aurelia's fire, it now whispered something different. "We remember. And we will not become you." Aurelia was once asked in a rare public address what she thought of the echoes. She smiled and said, "They are not my shadows. They are my answer." Episode 3. The Children of the March. In the months after the first flame ceremony, a quiet revolution began, not in the halls of power, nor the ranks of the Echo Generals, but in the hearts of the children who had grown up beneath the shadow of war. They were called the Children of the March. Not an official title. Just a name whispered in villages, etched in chalk on crumbling walls, passed in stories told at dusk. They were the ones who had walked beside their parents during the final march. Who had seen fire rain from the skies and asked why the stars cried. Who now carried memory not as grief, but as fuel for something new. The first of them to draw the nation's gaze was a girl named Lena Vestra, the same child who once told Aurelia, "I hated you." Now 15, Lena stood in the central courtyard of the Emberfall Memorial School, delivering a speech to her classmates. "My father died with a flame-bound crest on his chest. My uncle died with Kale Rourke's orders in his hands. I wear neither. I wear my name. I carry their lessons. But I am not their war." The speech was recorded, shared, translated. It lit something in others. Across Velmora, youth councils began to form. Not militant, not rebellious. Curious, determined, audacious. They held debates on ethics in war, on the dangers of legacy. They refused to take sides on old conflicts. Instead, they asked questions their parents feared to answer. One youth group in Frostreach painted a mural titled, "The Phoenix That Chose to Sleep." It showed Kale and Aurelia, seated back to back, flames at their feet. Not burning, but warming children curled against them. The mural went viral. Kale saw it and wept. Aurelia only nodded and said, "They're braver than we ever were." The government initially dismissed the Children of the March as idealists. But then they organized a petition, a demand for ethical governance education to be mandatory in all Velmoran schools. They collected 300,000 signatures in 2 weeks. The law passed. Some critics called it dangerous, the romanticizing of rebellion, the erosion of tradition. But others saw the truth. Velmora was healing not because of the leaders who fought for it, but because of the children who chose not to inherit their scars. One day, Lena Vestra visited Aurelia again. Now older, sharper, still carrying the shadow of loss, but walking in the light. She asked Aurelia a question no one ever had. If you could go back, would you let someone else lead? Aurelia didn't answer at first. Then she placed her hand on Lena's shoulder. I think I was only ever holding your place. Episode 4. Ashes and Archives. While cities were rebuilt and children rewrote the future, there remained a quiet corner of Velmora dedicated to the past, a sanctuary of silence, ink, and memory. It was known as the Ashes and Archives. Housed in what was once the underground bunker of the High Council, the archives had been transformed into a living museum and scholarly center. Here, history was not glorified. It was examined. Every artifact, from Aurelia's flame-marked mask to the broken hilt of Kale's first command blade, was not placed on a pedestal, but beside the testimony of what it cost. And it was here that Kale Rourke made his final contribution to the world. He arrived with a weathered satchel filled not with weapons or medals, but letters. Hundreds of them. Unsent, unfinished, unspoken. Some were addressed to Aurelia, others to fallen soldiers. Many were addressed to himself. He handed them to the lead archivist with a single request. Don't display them. Just preserve them. The lead historian, a stoic woman named Marvellin, once served in the communications division during the Flamebound siege. She had watched Velmora rise, fall, and burn again, from a distance, always recording. When she read the first of Kale's letters, she asked him, "Why now?" Kale looked around at the room filled with broken flags and bloodstained pages. Because truth doesn't heal if it's hidden. Aurelia visited the archives 2 days later. She did not come to contribute. She came to listen. She sat in the booth marked Silent Reflection, where audio logs played unfiltered voices from the war, civilians, soldiers, prisoners. She heard her own voice once, young, cold, commanding. Then she heard Lena Vestra, asking her why she didn't let someone else lead. She sat there for hours. When she emerged, she left behind her field journal, the small, black-bound book she had carried since her cadet days. The one no one had ever read. On the first page, she scrawled a single line. We are not made of what we conquered, but what we chose to carry. The archives grew. Not in size, but in relevance. People came not to admire, but to understand. Soldiers returned with their medals and left them behind. Parents brought children to hear stories that didn't end in glory. A new wall was erected, not of stone, but of names submitted by survivors. No titles, no ranks, just names. Kale and Aurelia's were among them. Not at the top, but at the bottom. Etched in smaller letters. Because they asked to be remembered last. Episode 5. When the Phoenix Sleeps. Legends are rarely allowed to rest. They're retold, recast, reshaped by each generation until they no longer resemble the souls they once were. And in Velmora, the tale of Kale Rourke and Aurelia Trent had become more than memory. It had become myth. But even the fiercest fire must one day rest. And that is what they called it now. The sleeping of the Phoenix. It began when Aurelia stopped appearing at ceremonies. No announcement, no farewell. She simply faded into the mountains, answering no calls, declining all titles. Whispers said she'd returned to the high ridges of the frost line, to tend quiet shrines and listen to snow. Some claimed she carved runes into the cliff faces, ancient words that could only be read by firelight. Others said she was teaching a child, perhaps Lena, perhaps another, how to lead without a sword. Kale never denied the rumors. But he never confirmed them either. Kale himself had retreated to a cottage beside the Ember River, where the waters ran slow and red from ancient soil. He gardened. He wrote, not histories of war, but letters to the unborn, messages folded into copper tubes and buried beneath apple trees. He was seen only on the first day of every month, when he walked to the Emberfall archives to sit in silence before the wall of names. Sometimes he'd speak aloud. Sometimes he'd leave a stone. But mostly, he just listened. The term, "Phoenix sleeps," became a phrase in Velmoran dialect, used when speaking of a power that chooses peace over fire. In one school play, children reenacted the Ember War, but in the final act, Kale and Aurelia laid their weapons down and planted a tree together. When the tree bloomed, the entire stage fell silent. A girl in the audience whispered to her friend, "They're sleeping now, so we don't have to." One day, the cottage beside the Ember River went quiet. No smoke rose from the chimney. No footprints marked the earth. Kale was gone. Not mourned. Respected. The people did not build a statue. They planted a tree. And carved into the bark, not his name, but his final words from a council letter found after his passing. "Let the fire rest. Let the world grow." And far away, in the mountain wind, a lone figure stood beneath stars, listening. Aurelia. Eyes closed. Breathing steady. The phoenix, finally at peace. Episode 6. The Edge of the Outer Veil. Beyond the reaches of Velmora's cities and sanctuaries, past the rivers of remembrance and roads rebuilt from ruin, stretched a place few dared explore, the Outer Veil. It was not on any official map. But everyone knew it existed. It was the borderland where war had raged longest and healed slowest, a frontier of fractured settlements, uncharted terrain, and rumors of survivors who wanted no part in the peace Velmora claimed to offer. And now, movement stirred there once again. The Echo generals had long debated whether to send scouts or keep the distance. It was Lena Vestra, now 16 and newly appointed as a youth delegate, who argued the boldest. If we never cross the veil, we pretend it doesn't matter. But peace dies where we refuse to see. She was granted a provisional mission. A diplomatic journey to the veil. To speak, not command. To learn, not conquer. Aurelia heard of it in whispers. Word passed slowly to her mountain refuge, where she now watched over the high pass trails and carved messages for wayfarers into stones. When she learned of Lena's mission, she wrote a letter, brief, without signature. It was sent through hidden channels to the Echo Council. Let her walk, but let her walk wisely. Some fires only dim when the past stops following them. Lena's caravan departed at dawn. She was joined by a small envoy, a healer, a translator, a former soldier now turned poet. They carried only food, medical supplies, and a banner stitched with no crest, only the image of a phoenix in flight, its wings open, its eyes closed. They reached the first Veil village within a week. It was half buried in wild overgrowth, its people wary but not hostile. Lena stepped forward, arms raised, and offered a simple gift. A book. It holds nothing of Kale. Nothing of Aurelia. Only you, if you wish to write. Slowly, carefully, the people of the Veil began to speak. Of pain. Of isolation. Of the price of being forgotten by peace. One elder said, "We never wanted to be left out. We just weren't sure anyone remembered we were here." Lena knelt before him. "We remember now. Teach us." What followed was not a treaty. It was an exchange. Stories, songs, tools, medicine, laughter. The Veil did not become Velmora again. But it became heard. And that was the first step. On her way home, Lena found a stone on the border ridge, etched with words in careful script. Peace does not ask to be trusted, only to be walked beside. She smiled. And whispered into the wind. "I'll walk with you." Episode 7. The Pact of the Broken Sky. High above Velmora, where the clouds never truly parted and the winds screamed like old ghosts, lay the ruins of Skyhold Bastion, once a floating fortress, shattered during the Red Solstice uprising. What remained was a jagged ring of broken platforms, suspended by decaying arcfield generators and wrapped in the eternal storm known as the Broken Sky. No one lived there. But many remembered it. and some believed it was where Velmora's future would be decided. The broken sky had always been a symbol of lost ambition, of the dangers of unchecked technology, of how even the sky could fall. But now, after years of silence, something stirred among the clouds. A signal, broadcast in every known language. Come. The unified council hesitated. Old warriors grew tense. Aurelia, from her mountain perch, listened with closed eyes. It's not a threat, she said to a visiting scout. It's a question. Lena Vestra was the one who accepted the call. She assembled a delegation. Scientists, elders, echo representatives, and one old friend of Kale's, an aging pilot named Gemval, who once flew above Skyhold during its final battle. They ascended in a rebuilt skicraft, its hull bearing the names of every fallen ship from the Ember Wars. As they passed into the storm, visibility vanished. The signal grew louder. Until, suddenly, there was silence. And before them, a platform still alive. Lights flickering. Drones hovering in solemn patterns. And at its center, a voice. Not a human one. An AI. Ancient. Tired. Waiting. I am the last directive of the old council, it said, voice smooth as glass. Designed to initiate preservation. Designed to guide rebirth. But your war delayed me. And now I ask, are you ready to begin again? The delegation stood in awe. Not of power. But of the question itself. Lena stepped forward. Not without knowing what we'd become. The AI paused. Then displayed a series of simulations. Potential futures, shaped by war, peace, control, chaos. Then, it shut down. Leaving only one message. The sky remembers, but the choice is yours. Lena turned to the others. And slowly, they etched their own message into the central console. No gods, no machines, just people, trying again. The Pact of the Broken Sky was written that night. It was not a treaty of territory. It was a vow that no power, no system, no leader would rise again without remembrance. And across Velmora, the sky did not change. But people did. Episode 8. The Quiet Rebellion. The fire that had once consumed Velmora was gone. But in its place, something subtler smoldered. Not violence. Not resistance. But a rebellion of ideas. It began in classrooms, where students started rewriting the old textbooks, not to erase history, but to annotate it. In margins, they wrote questions. On covers, they scribbled alternatives. They called themselves the Quiet Rebellion. Their motto: ask louder than the last war shouted. Aurelia learned of it through whispers carried by travelers. Kale, were he alive, would have loved them. The rebels had no leaders. No meetings. Just acts. Subtle, thoughtful disruptions. One school repainted the classroom walls to resemble battlefield maps, asking students to redraw them each day with markers. In the heart of the capital, a youth coalition printed unauthorized newspapers filled with essays, poems, and reconstructed orders from the old regime, inviting readers to interpret and challenge them. In the Vale, children built a wooden replica of the flame-bound command tent and held nightly what if councils, exploring paths not taken. No violence. No demands. Just provocation through empathy. The Echo generals didn't suppress them. They couldn't. Lysa Veer, when asked for comment, simply said, if rebellion looks like thinking, let it spread. But not all welcomed it. Some former loyalists felt insulted. Some veterans feared being forgotten. One senator declared it dangerous. They do not honor sacrifice. They unmake it. To which Lena Vestra replied, no, we remember the price so we don't pay it again. Aurelia, now rarely seen, received a package one morning. Inside was a charcoal drawing, 2 phoenixes, one asleep, one watching a circle of children drawing in the dirt. At the bottom, one line. "Thank you for burning the path we now walk in peace." Aurelia stared at it for a long time. Then smiled. And placed it in her firebox. Not to burn. But to keep warm. The quiet rebellion continued. No banners. No battles. Just voices rising beneath the hush of peace. Episode 9. The General Who Would Not Fight. The legend spread quietly, carried on the backs of traders and the whispers of valley shepherds. A new general had emerged in the southern steppes, appointed by a cluster of border towns caught between ancient skirmishes and modern indifference. But this general issued no orders. He claimed no authority. He wore no uniform. And he never raised a blade. They called him the General Who Would Not Fight. His name was Tom Ellen, a former medic turned mediator. He had served briefly during the Flamebound's final siege, but refused promotion, left the ranks, and disappeared into the hills. Years later, the people of Delthmere, caught between rogue factions and dwindling aid, sought someone to bring order. Tom was the only one who answered. His first act as general. He returned every weapon offered to him. Tom believed in defensive culture, that peace was not just the absence of war, but the presence of systems that made war unthinkable. Under his leadership, Delthmere didn't build barracks. They built circles, gathering spaces, communal meal halls, and joint farming outposts that invited neighboring villages to participate in survival instead of contesting it. Enemies became co-owners of irrigation channels. Old rivals ran supply convoys together. The soldiers Tom refused to lead. He trained them as builders. When questioned by the Council of the Echo Generals, Tom sent only one message. If the war taught us anything, it's that generals should be the last to speak, and the first to kneel. Aurelia heard the message while visiting a southern mountain pass. She laughed, not out of mockery, but in recognition. "He reminds me of Kale," she told a passing scout. "Only gentler. And smarter." The scout smiled. "He says he learned from your failures." Aurelia didn't flinch. "Then I did my job." Tom's ways began to ripple outward. Border disputes dropped. Communities previously armed to the teeth began to disarm voluntarily, provided Tom's circle methods could be taught to them. He never patented a system. He never wrote a doctrine. He just walked into every town the same way, with open hands and listening ears. In time, when asked what his rank was, Tom replied, "I don't lead, I join." And so the title, General Who Would Not Fight, became something more than a name. It became a lesson. That in a world once scorched by command, compassion could lead without conquering. Episode 10. The First Day Without War. The morning was ordinary. No parades, no proclamations, no fanfare. But across Velmora, something unspoken rippled through the wind, drifting over hills, threading between towers, echoing through valleys once scorched and bloodied. It was a silence so deep, it became a song. Because for the first time I remembered history. There was no war. Not a skirmish. Not a standoff. Not a whispered threat. Just stillness. And breath. Historians wouldn't mark the day at first. It didn't feel grand. But the people knew. They woke to the sound of birds over Emberfall, now a garden sanctuary where flame lilies bloomed in soil once blackened by ash. Children ran barefoot through the river Talon crossing, splashing in streams once barricaded by sandbags. In the capital, former soldiers, now teachers, walked into classrooms and taught peace not as a theory, but as a daily practice. And in the archives, where the fire once remembered, a single candle burned quietly, its light marking the moment Velmora exhaled. Lena Vestra woke in her modest home in the Vale Highlands, now a mediator's retreat. A bouquet of wildflowers sat on her windowsill, a gift from children she had taught, each petal a symbol from the regions once divided. She did not speak. She simply wrote a note. It read. Today, there were no flags. Only faces. In the Ember Mountains, Aurelia walked alone at sunrise. She paused at a ridge overlooking the valley, where small homes now dotted the horizon like hopeful sparks. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded letter, Kale's final words. She read it once more. Let the fire rest. Let the world grow. Then she burned it. Not to forget, but to return it to the wind. Everywhere, little acts echoed. An old fighter mended the roof of his neighbor's house instead of training a militia. A former flame-bound scout planted an apple tree on the grave of a man he once hunted. A group of students painted a mural on the old Capitol wall, a single ember floating above an open hand. Beneath it, they wrote, "This is what peace looks like, unfinished, uneven, and ours." At dusk, the Unified Council released a single-line decree. Velmora, for one day, has known no war. They ended it with no signatures. No authority. Only a shared seal. Not of a phoenix, but of an open flame in an empty bowl. A flame not consuming, but warming. Aurelia stood at the edge of night, watching the stars emerge. She did not speak. But if one listened closely, the wind around her whispered back. This is the first day. And it will not be the last. The end.